There are mothers who spend their entire lives in poverty, their hands rough and worn from selling bread in crowded markets, walking through the pouring rain on flooded streets in Nigeria, just so their children can have a chance to step into a world of wealth and success. But the most heartbreaking thing is that one day, the very child they sacrificed everything for becomes ashamed of them. That night in Lagos, inside a luxurious mansion glowing beneath crystal chandeliers, a powerful businesswoman locked her own mother inside a small room behind the kitchen, simply because the old woman was wearing a faded traditional dress in front of foreign guests. Outside, billionaires raised glasses of champagne while elegant violin music filled the air. But behind the closed door, an elderly mother sat quietly hugging an old cloth, hearing her own daughter coldly say, "Don't let her come outside." What no one knew was, the woman treated like a disgrace was actually the one who had sacrificed her entire life to build the empire her daughter now stood proudly on top of, and no one could have imagined that the very night the daughter tried to hide her mother from the world would become the night her own life began to fall apart. If you are watching this story from anywhere in the world, from Lagos, Abuja, or from a small corner somewhere far away, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and share the love in your heart for your parents. And if you love emotional stories about family, karma, and the true value of life, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss stories that move millions of people to reflect on what truly matters. Now, listen to this story until the very end, because sometimes the most painful thing in life is not poverty, but when someone becomes successful and forgets the person who sacrificed everything to help them reach that success. Many years ago, before the name Adaeze Okoye appeared on the covers of the most powerful business magazines in Africa, before she stepped out of shining Rolls-Royces beneath the golden lights of Lagos high society, before people called her the Queen of Technology in West Africa, Adaeze was just a skinny little girl living in the slums of Makoko, a place where people didn't need a clock to know when rain was coming. All they had to do was look at the water beneath the wooden houses turning darker, smell the heavy scent of mud and sewage rising into the air, and everyone would rush to lift their old furniture before the floodwater poured inside. Makoko never truly slept. During the day, the sound of wooden paddles hitting the water echoed nonstop. Fish sellers shouting, children crying, hot oil crackling from market stalls. And at night, the sound of rain pounding against rusted tin roofs felt like it could break straight into people's dreams. Adaeze often curled herself up on an old mattress that had almost completely flattened. She pulled a thin blanket up to her neck, listening to raindrops falling one by one into the plastic bucket her mother placed in the middle of the house. Some nights, cold rainwater dripped directly onto her face. Freezing cold. She would shift to another corner, only to hear rats running across the roof. But the thing that hurt Adaeze the most was never poverty itself. It was the feeling of being pitied. She hated the way people looked at Makoko, hated how they stared at the slum like it was a place unfit for human beings, hated how every time she stepped outside the market, she felt smaller than everyone else. Every morning, Mama Chinyere woke up before sunrise. Outside was still dark. Cold, damp air slipped through the rotten wooden walls. She sat in front of the charcoal stove while everyone else was asleep. Her thin hands moved quickly, shaping akara one by one. Sweat formed on her forehead even while the air was still cold. The smell of hot oil soon filled the tiny house. Adaeze, wake up, my child. I have to go to the market early. Her voice was always gentle. So gentle, it almost sounded like she was afraid of waking her daughter too suddenly. Adaeze slowly opened her eyes, and the first thing she always saw was her mother's back. Small, bent over, silent. The posture of someone who had carried the weight of life for far too long. But back then, Adaeze never understood the exhaustion hidden in that bent back. In her eyes, her mother was only a poor woman selling akara in the market, and Adaeze hated that. One morning, the school held a parent meeting. Luxury SUVs lined both sides of the street outside the school gate. The scent of expensive perfume filled the air. Elegant, wealthy mothers stepped out wearing beautiful dresses. High heels clicked against the polished stone floor. Some even wore sunglasses, though the sun wasn't shining. Adaeze stood quietly in the schoolyard, pulling at the collar of her old uniform. Then she saw her mother, Mama Chinyere was slowly walking toward the gate in a faded traditional outfit. Her sandals were nearly worn through, and on her head, she still carried her familiar bowl of akara. Because after the meeting, she still had to hurry back to the market to sell food. Adiza felt her chest tighten. Then she heard giggling behind her. "Oh look, the akara woman is here. Is that your mother?" Another student mockingly imitated a market seller's voice, making the whole group laugh even louder. Ada as if froze. She felt like the entire schoolyard was staring at her. Her face burned hot. Her ears rang. She wanted to disappear immediately. But Mama Chinyere didn't notice anything. She still smiled warmly like always. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw her daughter. Quickly, she pulled out a hot akara wrapped carefully in paper. "I saved this for you." Her hand reached out with so much love. Adeze looked around. The laughter was still there. Several students were pointing at her mother. And for the first time in her life, Adeze slapped her mother's hand away. The akara fell onto the dirt. Oil spread across the dusty ground. "Don't ever come to my school again." Her voice came out louder than she intended. The entire courtyard suddenly fell silent. Mama Chinyere stopped moving. Something deep and painful flashed across her eyes, as if someone had just crushed her heart. But only seconds later, she still bent down to pick up the akara, carefully brushing the dust away, as if afraid of ruining the food she had woken before dawn to make for her daughter. "I'm sorry, my child. I just wanted to bring you something to eat." Her voice was so soft it almost disappeared into the air. Adize turned and ran away. She never looked back. She never saw Mama Chinyere standing alone in the schoolyard for a very long time. Her eyes red with tears, her hand still holding the now cold akara. From that day on, something began growing inside Adeze. Not determination, but shame. She started hating everything connected to her past. The tiny house that always smelled like frying oil. The voices calling her mother's name at the market. Walking past her mother's stall after school. One day, some classmates walked past Mama Chinyere's akara stand. Adeze immediately turned away, pretending not to know her. But she still heard her mother calling from behind. "Adeze, would you like to take some akara home?" Adeze walked faster. So fast it almost looked like she was running away. That night, Mama Chinyere still saved the best food for her daughter. Still asked about school like she had never been hurt. And somehow, that made Adeze even more uncomfortable. She couldn't understand why her mother was always so kind. Why she never got angry. As Adeze grew older, her ambition grew stronger. She studied like someone trying to escape destiny itself. During nights without electricity, she studied beneath a dim oil lamp until sunrise. Sweat rolled down her temples. Mosquitoes buzzed around her ears. Some nights, Mama Chinyere sat beside her all night fanning mosquitoes away while her daughter slept. Her eyes turned red from exhaustion. But the next morning, she still went back to the market as usual. During heavy storms, floodwater reached up to her knees. Mama Chinyere still carried her goods for miles just to pay Adeze's tuition on time. One day, she slipped into dirty floodwater. The tuition money became completely soaked. She sat beside the charcoal stove drying every single bill before bringing it to school. But not once did she let Adeze know how much she suffered. One night, Adeze woke up thirsty. She walked into the kitchen. Under the dim oil lamp, Mama Chinyere sat alone at the old wooden table. In front of her was only a glass of water. "Aren't you eating?" Mama Chinyere startled slightly. Then she quickly smiled. "I'm already full." Adeze nodded and returned to bed. Many years later, she would discover that her mother had starved herself for 2 days that week, just to buy her an old English textbook, the same book Adeze once treasured like gold. But the closer Adeze moved toward success, the more she wanted to erase her past. The day she received a university scholarship in England, Mama Chinyere cried all night. She ran all over Makoko telling the neighbors, "My daughter's life is going to change. She's going to become someone great." Everyone in the slums celebrated with her. Some even cried while hugging her. Because in Makoko, a child leaving to study abroad felt like a miracle. At the airport, Mama Chinyere wore the best outfit she owned. Even though the fabric had become so old, the sleeves were beginning to fray. She kept fixing her daughter's hair, kept giving endless reminders. "Stay warm, my child. Don't skip meals. If you miss me, call home." Adeze only nodded impatiently. She had already started noticing the people around them. Other students carried luxury luggage. Their parents dressed elegantly. They spoke with confidence. But her mother still wore faded old sandals. When Mama Chinière hugged her for the last time, Adeze hugged her back only briefly, then quickly walked away. She was afraid people would stare too long. Afraid they would discover she came from Makoko. Afraid they would learn her mother sold Akara in the market. And from that moment on, Adeze began cutting herself away from her past. In England, she slowly transformed herself. She perfected the accent of the upper class, learned how to use silverware like aristocrats, learned how to smile just enough, learned how to hide everything connected to Makoko. Whenever friends asked about her family, she answered vaguely, "My family is private." She never spoke about the wooden house in the slums, never spoke about the mother who stayed awake all night selling Akara to fund her education. In fact, one day a friend casually asked, "Your mother owns a business?" Adeze paused for several seconds, then quietly answered, "Something like that." She didn't have the courage to tell the truth. And, as the years passed, Adeze Okoye returned to Lagos as a completely different person. Beautiful, powerful, rich. Her name appeared on Forbes Africa, on television, on giant billboards across Lagos. She traveled by private jet, lived in a multi-million-dollar mansion, dined with politicians and billionaires. Whenever she entered luxurious ballrooms, every eye turned toward her. And Adeze loved that feeling, the feeling of being admired, respected, seen as the perfect symbol of success. But there was one thing nobody in that glamorous world knew. Adeze had never allowed her mother to appear before the media, never invited Mama Chinière to important parties. Whenever reporters asked about family, she always avoided the subject. "My family prefers a private life." That was the answer she used for years. Over time, Mama Chinière slowly became a secret, a part of the past Adeze wanted locked away forever. The mother who once sold Akara to raise her daughter was now only allowed to see her during rare and hurried visits. One day, Mama Chinière brought a bag of food to Adeze's mansion, but the gatekeeper stopped her outside, assuming she was a street vendor. Adeze saw everything from the second-floor window. She stood there silently for a very long time, a very long time. But in the end, she still turned around and walked away. Because inside the mansion that day, important business guests were visiting, and she didn't want anyone to see her mother. Didn't want anyone to know that the most powerful businesswoman in Lagos had once been the daughter of a poor Akara seller from Makoko. Until that night, the night Adeze Okoye's perfect world finally began to crack. The night the woman she had spent years hiding from the spotlight would walk directly into the grandest ballroom in Lagos and leave the entire city speechless. The sound of the violin echoed longer and longer through the grand ballroom. Soft melodies drifted beneath the sparkling crystal chandeliers, gliding over champagne glasses filled with pale golden bubbles, before dissolving into the elegant laughter of people who had never known what it felt like to go hungry. That night, the Okoye mansion on Victoria Island looked like a golden palace in the heart of glamorous Lagos. Outside the gates, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, and Mercedes Maybachs lined up one after another. Headlights swept across towering palm trees. Security guards in black suits stood in rows, bowing politely as they opened car doors. Photographers pushed forward, desperate to capture every moment of Nigeria's elite arriving at the celebration. Inside the mansion, the scent of expensive perfume mixed with the aroma of aged wine. Politicians shook hands with calculated smiles. Oil billionaires discussed $100 million deals with European investors. Young entrepreneurs gathered around luxurious glass tables, talking about technology, artificial intelligence, real estate, and the future of Africa. The numbers they casually mentioned were larger than anything a family in Makoko could ever dream of in an entire lifetime. And in the center of all that dazzling light stood Adeze Okoye like a queen. Her golden evening gown wrapped around her slender body as if it had been crafted from light itself. The diamonds around her neck and wrists reflected the chandelier glow so brightly they almost hurt the eyes. Her hair was styled flawlessly. Her red lips curved into a confident smile. Every time Adeze walked past, every eye followed her automatically. An English investor raised his champagne glass high. To the future of Okoye Global. Instantly, applause filled the ballroom. Adeze smiled gracefully. "Thank you." Her voice was soft, calm, perfect. so perfect that no one noticed. Her fingers gripping the crystal glass so tightly, her knuckles had turned white. Because deep inside, Ades was terrified. Not afraid of losing a business deal. Not afraid of the stock market crashing. Not afraid of her competitors. The thing she feared most was a small door behind the kitchen suddenly opening. She feared her elderly mother appearing before all these powerful people, wearing a faded traditional dress. She feared the poor past she had spent her entire life burying, suddenly stepping into the glamorous lights of Lego's high society. Behind the mansion, inside a tiny room beside the kitchen, Mama Chenier sat quietly on a low wooden chair. The room was so cramped that if she stretched her legs even slightly farther, they would hit the old cardboard boxes stacked against the wall. There were no large windows, no air conditioning, nothing remotely resembling the luxury outside in the ballroom. Only a weak yellow bulb hanging from the ceiling. Its flickering light looked like the exhausted breathing of someone who had lived too many years in hardship. From far away, the violin music still drifted inside. Laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, people celebrating her daughter's success. Mama Chenier smiled softly, a small smile, gentle, quiet, full of pride. She really did it. She whispered to herself, "My daughter truly made it." Her aging eyes slowly lowered to the wrinkled hands resting in her lap. Those hands had once woken before dawn to shape a kara beside a burning charcoal stove, had walked through flooded streets in Makoko during heavy storms, had trembled from hunger, while still secretly giving the last portion of food to her daughter. Those rough, overworked hands tonight had to stay hidden beneath an old cloth, because her own daughter was afraid people might see them. Mama Chenier didn't want to blame Adize. Or perhaps, sometimes a mother is in so much pain that she still searches for reasons to forgive her child. She told herself, she's just under pressure. Tonight's guests are important. Maybe she's only afraid I'll embarrass her somehow. But no matter how hard she tried to think that way, her heart still ached quietly. A silent pain, a hidden pain, as though someone had not only locked the room's door, but had also locked away the love between mother and daughter behind all that wealth. At that moment, Mama Chinier's throat suddenly burned dry. She placed a hand on her chest and coughed softly. Once, then again, but the cough quickly became violent. Her frail body trembled uncontrollably. She reached for the glass of water on the small table beside her chair, but her vision had weakened with age. Her hand missed. The glass crashed onto the tiled floor. Crash. The sharp sound shattered the silence. For one frozen moment, everything stopped. Outside in the hallway, a young waitress turned around in shock. She hurried over and cracked open the door. "Mama, are you okay?" Mama Cheniere tried to stand. "I just wanted some water, child." Her voice was weak and broken from coughing. But the moment the door opened, light from the hallway flooded into the dark room. And right then, two foreign guests happened to be walking past the back corridor of the mansion. One silver-haired man suddenly stopped. He looked inside the room. At the old wooden chair, at the shattered glass on the floor, at the elderly woman wearing a faded traditional dress worn thin by time. His eyebrows tightened slightly. "Who is she?" The question wasn't loud, but it landed in the hallway like a stone thrown into still water. The waitress immediately turned pale. She glanced nervously toward the ballroom, wanting to shut the door at once. But it was already too late. Several nearby guests had begun turning to look. Whispers spread quietly through the hallway. "What happened? Who is that woman? Is she one of the workers?" Each question stabbed directly into Adaiz's deepest fear. In the center of the glowing ballroom, Adaiz suddenly saw the back door standing open. Just for a second, but long enough for her blood to run cold. The smile froze on her lips. The champagne glass tilted slightly in her hand. A drop of wine fell onto the polished marble floor. At that moment, Adaize could no longer hear the violin, could no longer hear the guests talking. Every sound disappeared completely. All she could see was her mother standing behind that doorway. The faded clothing, the worn sandals, the hair that had turned so much grayer. Everything Adaize had spent years burying was now standing beneath the lights of high society. Adaize walked quickly, then almost ran. Her high heels struck the cold marble floor sharply. Clack, clack, clack. Each step sliced through the mansion's silence. When she arrived, she yanked the door open violently. The entire hallway fell silent. Mama Chinier looked at her daughter. Inside those aging eyes were panic, confusion, fear, but still a tiny spark of hope. Adaeze, she whispered softly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. But Adaeze wasn't listening anymore. All she saw were the investor's eyes. The eyes of wealthy people. The eyes of people who could turn her into tomorrow morning's headline. And in one terrible moment, completely consumed by shame, Adaeze shouted, "Who allowed her out here?" Her voice echoed through the hallway. The violin music in the ballroom stopped instantly. A heavy silence fell across the entire mansion. Mama Chinieri froze. Her hands instinctively tightened around the old cloth she was holding. I only wanted some water. Her voice was so soft it almost disappeared. Adaeze clenched her jaw. Water? Do you even realize how important tonight is? Do you know who those people out there are? Mama Chinier lowered her head. Yes, I know. Then why would you let them see you looking like this? The words left nearby servants completely stunned. A young waitress covered her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. One male servant lowered his head to the floor, unable to continue watching. Mama Chinier slowly lifted her gaze. Her old eyes were red with tears. Looking like this, she repeated quietly. Are you really that ashamed of your own mother? Adaeze hesitated. Only for a second. One tiny moment when her heart nearly softened. But behind her, people were still watching. And Adaeze felt she couldn't afford weakness. Couldn't allow even a crack in the perfect image she had built. She turned toward the security guard. Her voice became ice cold. Take her to the storage room in the back. The hallway froze. Mama Chinier stared at her daughter in disbelief. What did you say? Adaeze refused to look at her. I said take her away. One security guard stepped forward. But he hesitated. Madam, she is... Adaeze snapped around. Do you want to lose your job? The guard immediately lowered his head. He gently extended his hand. Mama, please. Mama Chinier did not resist. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She only stood there silently for a long time. So long that it felt as though her heart had shattered completely in that hallway. Then slowly, she nodded. Not because she agreed, but because she was too hurt to say anything else. She stepped over the broken glass, scattered across the floor. Her old sandals touched the freezing marble. Each of her footsteps was incredibly soft, yet somehow left countless people in the mansion unable to breathe properly. As she passed Adaeze, Mama Chinier stopped. She looked at her daughter for a long time, without anger, without hatred, without curses. Only a sadness so deep it no longer had tears. Then she asked, Are you truly that ashamed of your mother? No one answered. Even the foreign guests fell silent. Because that question wasn't only for Adaeze. It sounded like a question directed at everyone who had forgotten which hands had once pulled them out of the darkest days of their lives. Adaeze stood frozen. Her lips tightened. For one brief moment, old memories suddenly flooded back. Mama Chinier walking through rain to take her to school. Mama Chinier starving herself to buy books. Mama Chinier smiling beside the charcoal stove saying, I don't need anything, as long as you have a future. Adaeze's chest tightened painfully, but she immediately shoved the memories deep down again. She turned her face away. Take her away. This time, her voice was quieter, but far colder. Mama Chinier nodded softly. All right, my daughter. She didn't call her CEO Adaeze, didn't call her Madame Okoye, didn't call her the most powerful woman in Lagos. She simply called her daughter. And somehow, those two simple words hurt Adaeze more than she wanted to admit. The security guard slowly led Mama Chinier down the back hallway. Her frail figure gradually disappeared from the sparkling chandelier light. Then the door closed. Click. The sound was small, but it felt like the sound of a heart breaking into pieces. Adaeze inhaled deeply and returned to the ballroom. She forced herself to smile. My apologies for the small inconvenience. But nobody smiled back. Nobody applauded. The atmosphere of the party had completely changed. The eyes once filled with admiration now carried confusion and doubt. One guest whispered softly, Was that her mother? Another replied quietly, I think so. Adaeze heard every word, every single one, but she pretended not to hear anything. She lifted her champagne glass once again, trying desperately to restore perfection. But some cracks, once they appear, cannot be hidden anymore, no matter how bright the lights shine. And behind the mansion, Inside the cold storage room, Mama Chenier slowly sat down among dusty old boxes. She placed the cloth gently across her knees, then quietly stared through the small crack beneath the door, where the ballroom's light had become nothing more than a distant golden glow. She did not cry, because some pain cuts so deeply that even tears become powerless. She only closed her eyes slowly, then whispered through trembling breaths, "Lord, please don't let my daughter lose her soul because of wealth." And at that exact moment, outside the mansion gates, a black Rolls-Royce slowly came to a stop. The car door opened. An elderly man stepped out, leaning on a cane. He lifted his eyes toward the glowing mansion. His face was stern, his gaze heavy, as though he carried a secret powerful enough to leave all of Lagos speechless. And that fateful night was far from over. It was only just beginning. The atmosphere inside the ballroom remained painfully heavy after Mama Chenier had been taken away to the storage room behind the mansion. The violin had started playing again, but now, the music no longer sounded elegant. It sounded like a desperate melody trying to stitch back together something that had just been torn apart beneath the crystal chandeliers. The investors were still standing there. Champagne glasses were still in their hands. The expensive suits remained perfectly pressed, but no one was truly focused on the party anymore. People had started looking at Adeze differently, no longer with pure admiration like only moments before. Now their eyes carried suspicion, curiosity, disappointment. Several guests leaned closer and whispered in English, "Was that really her mother? She locked her own mother away?" Dear God, the voices weren't loud, but inside the crushing silence of the ballroom, they echoed with terrifying clarity. Adeze heard every word, every single one, yet she kept smiling, a smile so perfectly beautiful and painfully perfect at the same time, because her entire life, Adeze had learned how to hide her emotions. When poverty wounded her, she learned to transform pain into ambition. When people looked down on her, she learned how to become stronger than everyone else. And when she began feeling ashamed of her origins, she learned how to bury her past deep underground. So deep that even she believed she had forgotten it. But tonight, that past had stepped out of the darkness, right in front of all of Lagos. Adeze inhaled slowly. She lifted her champagne glass once again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please continue enjoying the evening." Her voice remained calm, soft, controlled, exactly like the powerful businesswoman everyone expected her to be. But at that exact moment, a beam of white headlights swept across the massive garden outside the mansion. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom slowly entered through the gates. Every security guard immediately stiffened. One man wearing an earpiece whispered quietly into his radio, "No way. That's Dr. Obiora Nnamdi's car." The name moved through the ballroom like an invisible shockwave. Several politicians instantly straightened their posture. Nigerian billionaires adjusted their ties. Even the European businessmen turned toward the entrance in disbelief. Because in West Africa, everyone knew Obiora Nnamdi, a living legend, the man behind the most powerful investment fund in Africa, the man who had rescued dozens of corporations from bankruptcy, the man capable of shaking the Lagos stock market with a single phone call. But what frightened people most about him was his mystery. For years, Obiora had almost completely disappeared from elite society. He attended no parties, avoided the media, refused to meet young entrepreneurs. Some claimed his health was failing. Others believed he was secretly choosing the heir to his financial empire. But no one knew the truth. And tonight, he had appeared here. Right when the mansion's atmosphere was collapsing, the Rolls-Royce stopped. The door slowly opened. An elderly man stepped out, leaning on a cane. His hair was nearly all silver. His black suit was perfectly tailored. His face carried the heavy marks of time. But the most intimidating thing was his eyes. Cold, still, as though they could see through every mask people wore. The ballroom fell completely silent. Even the violin stopped. Adeze felt her heart pounding. She quickly descended the staircase. "Sir, I didn't expect you to come." She lowered her head respectfully, the kind of respect she had never shown her own mother. But Dr. Obiora did not look at her. His eyes slowly scanned the ballroom. The crystal glasses, the dazzling chandeliers, the tense faces watching him carefully. Then his gaze stopped at the back hallway, the same hallway where Mama Chenier had just been taken. Suddenly the entire mansion felt colder. Adayez felt something dark rising inside her chest. Something heavy. Something terrible. Like she was about to lose something that no amount of money could ever repair. Then Dr. Obiora finally spoke. His voice was low, slow, but powerful enough to freeze the entire room. Where is Chinyere? Adayez froze. Every sound around her disappeared instantly. Sir? For a moment, she thought she had heard him wrong. Obiora tightened his grip on the cane. This time, he looked directly into Adayez's eyes. I asked, where is Chinyere? Several guests exchanged shocked glances. Adayez felt her throat go dry. You know my mother? The moment the question left her lips, Dr. Obiora's expression changed completely. The coldness disappeared. In its place was pain. He let out a bitter laugh. Know her? He repeated softly. Then he stepped forward with his cane. If your mother hadn't sold the last piece of land she owned to save me from bankruptcy years ago, there would be no Obiora Namdi today. The entire ballroom felt as though all the air had vanished. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Adayez's mind went completely blank. That's impossible. She stumbled half a step backward, but Obiora continued. His voice echoed clearly through the luxurious mansion. 30 years ago, I was a failure. Every bank rejected me. Every investor turned their back on me. I was drowning in debt. I had already planned to end my life. The silence became so complete people could hear each other breathing, because never before had anyone heard this powerful man speak about his past. But then, your mother appeared. Obiora's eyes grew red. She wasn't rich. She had no power. She owned nothing except one small piece of land, the final possession of her family. And yet she sold it to give me the money. A nearby businesswoman covered her mouth in shock. An elderly politician slowly shook his head in disbelief. May God. Obiora looked around the ballroom slowly. His eyes turned colder again. While all of you laughed at a poor woman, that very woman helped build the greatest financial empire in West Africa. Adayez felt her legs trembling. All her life, her mother had never told her this story, never bragged, never demanded recognition, never reminded anyone of her sacrifice. Mama Chinyere had never asked for gratitude from anyone. She simply lived quietly, sacrificed quietly. No one knew. No one could have imagined that the woman who sold a Kara in Makoko was the hidden reason a financial legend even existed. But the shock wasn't over yet. Dr. Obiora slowly opened the old leather briefcase beside him. He pulled out a thick stack of documents, then raised them before the entire ballroom. 3 months ago, I decided to transfer the largest portion of my personal shares in Okoye Global to the person who truly deserved them. Adayez's face turned pale. Sir. Her hands began trembling. Obiora opened the documents, then spoke each word slowly and clearly. The controlling 35% stake in Okoye Global belongs to Mama Chinyere. Crash. A wine glass shattered against the marble floor. Then another. No one could stay calm anymore. Whispers exploded across the ballroom. What? She owns the company? Oh my God. Adayez stood frozen. Her entire body went cold. Her eyes widened in complete disbelief. Because for the first time in her life, she realized the woman she had locked away in the storage room was not only her mother, she was also the most powerful shareholder of the empire Adayez herself was running. A French investor slowly turned toward Adayez. There was no admiration left in his eyes anymore. Only disappointment. You locked the owner of your company behind the kitchen? The words struck like a slap across the ballroom. Adayez felt the entire world collapsing around her. The people who had raised champagne to celebrate her only moments ago now quietly avoided looking at her. Several guests placed their glasses down and walked away without saying a word. Because among the elite, nothing was more terrifying than watching someone lose their humanity in public. Dr. Obiora turned toward Adayez again. His voice lowered, but became colder than any shout. Did the little girl from Makoko die already? Adayez couldn't answer. Her throat tightened painfully. Memories flooded her mind. Her mother selling a Kara in the rain. Her mother staying awake all night sewing clothes for her. Her mother starving herself to buy books. And for the first time in many years, Adayez felt fear. Not fear of losing contracts. Not fear of losing money. Not fear of the media. But fear that, perhaps for many years now, she had become someone even she no longer recognized. Dr. Obiora turned away. Take me to Cheniere. No one dared stop him. The security guards immediately stepped aside, and Ada A's remained standing motionless beneath the glittering chandeliers. A powerful businesswoman, a symbol of Nigerian success. Yet at that moment, she looked lonelier than anyone else inside that enormous mansion. And in the back, inside the freezing storage room, Mama Cheniere still sat quietly among dusty old boxes, completely unaware that in only a few more minutes, all of Lagos would bow its head before the woman her own daughter had once considered the greatest shame of her life. 3 days after that fateful party, all of Nigeria was still talking about the name Adeye's Okoye. From the luxurious cafes of Victoria Island to the crowded markets of Makoko, even on evening television programs broadcast across West Africa, people were talking about the businesswoman who had locked her own mother inside a tiny room behind her mansion. Social media exploded like a storm. Images of Mama Cheniere in her faded traditional clothing spread across the internet. Some people reposted videos of her being escorted down the back hallway. Others shared photos of her sitting silently inside the cold storage room. Under every post, tens of thousands of comments appeared. Some people were furious. Some were disappointed. Others broke down crying as they thought about their own parents. Headlines flashed across television screens and online newspapers. The CEO who hid her own mother. The woman behind the billion-dollar empire. Lagos is shocked. How power destroyed a daughter's heart. Adiza's name covered every media platform. But she was no longer a symbol of success. She had become a story that broke an entire nation's heart. Foreign investors quietly began pulling away. Meetings were canceled. Contracts were frozen. Okoye Global stock price dropped hour by hour. The same people who once fought for a seat beside Adeze at luxurious parties now avoided mentioning her name as though it carried bad luck. And the media kept repeating the same question. How could a woman who grew up in poverty treat her own mother this way? Inside the cold penthouse at the top of Okoye Tower, Adaize sat alone in front of the television, still playing the evening news. The pale blue light from the screen reflected across her exhausted face. For the past 3 days, Adaize had barely slept. The elegant gown from that night still hung over the sofa. A half-finished glass of wine remained on the table. Everything in the apartment was perfect. But somehow, that perfection made the place feel terrifyingly empty. The news anchor's voice echoed through the room. Dr. Obiora Nnamdi confirms that Mama Cheniere is the largest shareholder of Okoye Global. Adaize immediately grabbed the remote and shut the television off. The room fell silent, a suffocating silence. She buried her face in her hands. Her hair, once always flawless, now fell messily around her shoulders. Her eyes were red from exhaustion. For the past 3 days, every time she closed her eyes, she heard her mother's voice again. Are you truly that ashamed of your mother? The words repeated inside her mind like a dull blade, not sharp enough to end the pain quickly, only slowly carving deeper into her heart. Adaize stood up. She walked toward the massive glass windows overlooking rainy Lagos below. Lightning tore across the night sky. Distant thunder echoed far away. Streams of headlights stretched through the rain-covered streets like endless trails of gold and red. For the first time in many years, Adaize was afraid of silence. Because once the applause disappeared, once the glowing articles vanished, once the praise from high society faded away, she was finally forced to face herself. And then she realized that even though she lived inside a multi-million-dollar penthouse, even though she could buy almost anything in the world, she had never felt emptier. At that exact moment, her phone vibrated. It was the old mansion butler. His elderly voice trembled with worry. Madame, I think Mama Cheniere left the house early this morning. Adaize froze. What do you mean? I can't find her anywhere. Some people said they saw her walking in the rain. Adaize felt her heart tighten painfully. Where is my mother? It was the first time in many years that she had said the words, my mother, with the terrified voice of a child about to lose the most precious thing in her life. Adaize rushed out of the penthouse. No bodyguards, no driver, no assistant. Only the sound of rain crashing against the black Mercedes, speeding through the flooded streets of Lagos. She searched everywhere. The old market in Makoko, the narrow alleys where her mother once sold akara, the abandoned wooden house they had left behind years ago. Adaize stepped out into the rain. She screamed for her mother desperately, but only the sound of rain and cold wind answered her. Mama Chinier was nowhere to be found. The storm grew heavier. Water blurred the windshield. Adayez gripped the steering wheel so tightly her fingers turned white. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was about to lose the most important thing she had ever had. Not her company, not money, not fame, but the only person who had ever loved her unconditionally, the only person who had always stood beside her, even when she didn't deserve it. The Mercedes slowly stopped in front of a small old church on the outskirts of Lagos. A faint yellow light glowed from inside. Rain tapped sadly against the rusted roof. Then Adayez saw a figure sitting beneath a small shelter outside. The traditional clothing was completely soaked. Thin shoulders trembled in the cold wind. It was Mama Chinier, Adayez Froze. And in that moment, every memory came flooding back like a tidal wave. Her mother walking through storms to take her to school. Her mother starving herself to buy books. Her mother staying awake all night sewing uniforms beneath an oil lamp. In that terrible day, the day her mother bent down to pick up the Akara that had fallen into the dirt after Adayez slapped it away in front of everyone at school. Adayez's heart shattered completely. She broke down crying, not the controlled tears of a sophisticated businesswoman, but the broken sobbing of a child finally realizing what she had destroyed. Adayez threw the car door open and ran into the pouring rain. Mum! Mama Chinier slowly turned around. She saw her daughter running toward her through the storm. No more mask of the powerful CEO. No more cold elegance of a woman obsessed with control. Only a daughter, drowning in fear and pain. Adayez collapsed to her knees before her mother. Her knees slammed against the wet concrete. The most powerful businesswoman in Lagos, the woman who once commanded the respect of hundreds, was now kneeling in the rain before a poor elderly woman. Rain mixed with tears running down her face. Mom! Adayez's voice broke apart. I'm sorry. Mama Chinier remained silent. Adayez cried even harder. I'm sorry. I forgot who gave me the life I have today. You sacrificed everything for me. You starved, suffered, gave up your entire life. And her voice collapsed again. Her shoulders trembled violently. I treated you like you were the greatest shame of my life. Rain pounded against the church roof. Far away, church bells slowly echoed through the night. Mama Chinier looked at her daughter for a long time, her old eyes filled with tears. And in that moment, she no longer saw the CEO from television. She only saw the little girl from Makoko, the little girl who used to fear the dark, who climbed into her mother's arms during storms when rain leaked through the roof, who cried whenever classmates bullied her at school. Mama Chinier's trembling hands slowly rose. She wiped the tears from her daughter's face, exactly the way she had done when Adayez was little. I never hated you. Her voice was soft as the wind. Adayez sobbed uncontrollably. Don't forgive me. I don't deserve it. Mama Chinier gently shook her head. Do you know the most painful thing for a mother? Adayez looked up at her. It's watching her child lose their beautiful heart while chasing money. She placed her rough hand against her daughter's cheek, the same hand hardened by years of survival. I never needed a mansion. I never needed your money. I only needed you to remember. Before you became the most powerful woman in Lagos, you were once the little girl I held in my arms during rainy nights in Makoko. Adayez buried her face against her mother's chest and cried harder than she had cried in years. She cried for her childhood, for her shame, for all the years she had spent running away from the person who loved her most. Outside, Lagos still glittered with lights. Skyscrapers still stood proudly in the rain. Luxury cars still sped through the avenues. The world continued moving forward, but in that moment, all the wealth in the world suddenly felt small, because there are some things that once they are lost, cannot be bought back. Even with an entire lifetime, Mama Chinier held her daughter tightly, just like she used to, back when they were still poor, still living in that cramped wooden house in Makoko, but had never once been separated in heart. Many months after that fateful rainy night, the name Adayez Okoye was still spoken throughout Lagos. But this time, people no longer spoke about her as the cold-hearted businesswoman who locked her own mother inside a tiny room behind a luxurious mansion. The tone had changed, slower, quieter, and filled with something between regret and reflection. Some people still blamed her. Television programs continued analyzing the scandal. Some believed Adayez was only trying to repair the reputation she had destroyed, but others, had seen her with their own eyes during the earliest hours of the morning, when Lagos had not yet fully awakened, when the first rays of sunlight still struggled through the damp mist after a rainy night. No diamond-covered gowns, no bodyguards in black suits, no endless convoy of luxury vehicles. Only Adeyes wearing a simple faded shirt softened by years of use, sitting beneath an old umbrella in the corner of a poor market beside Mama Cinieri. In front of them, hot oil crackled inside a large frying pan. The scent of fresh akara filled the cool morning air. And the businesswoman, who once commanded the respect of Nigeria's entire financial world, was now awkwardly learning how to shape bean cakes the way her mother once had. At first, Adeyes's hands trembled clumsily. She dropped dough onto the table. Some of the akara came out so misshapen that nearby children giggled softly. Hot oil splashed onto the back of her hand, causing her to jump backward in surprise. Nearby vendors whispered among themselves, "Isn't that Adeze Okoye, the woman who used to live in that mansion on Victoria Island? Is she really selling akara with her mother?" In the past, hearing whispers like that would have suffocated Adeyes with shame. But this time, she didn't lower her head or turn away. She simply glanced quietly toward her mother. Mama Cinieri smiled gently. "Don't be afraid of the hot oil, my child. When I was young, I got burned all the time." Her voice was as soft as the morning breeze. Adeze lowered her eyes toward her mother's hands. The faded scars, the hardened skin from years of hot oil burns, the fingers bent by time and hardship. For so many years, she had never truly looked at those hands. Back then, she only saw roughness, poverty, something that did not belong among crystal glasses in glamorous ballrooms. But now, Adeyes understood that every scar on her mother's hands was part of the ladder that had lifted her to the top. Every burn, every sleepless night, every hungry day was written clearly into those hands. Adeyes lowered her head silently. Without another word, she continued learning how to make akara. One by one, the bean cakes dropped into the hot oil. The sizzling sounds echoed through the poor market, and somehow, those sounds reminded Adeyes of childhood. But this time, the memories no longer filled her with shame. They became the truth she had finally found the courage to face. After the scandal that night, Adeyes' life changed completely. She sold 2 beachfront mansions, canceled the extravagant parties she once treated like symbols of status, shut down flashy projects built only to glorify her name. Many people in the financial world thought she had gone mad. Some newspapers even wrote, "Adeyes Okoye is destroying her own empire." But Adeyes no longer cared. For the first time in her life, she understood that some things mattered more than being admired by the world. During a board meeting at Okoye Global, Adeyes entered the conference room wearing a simple black suit, no diamond necklace, no expensive high heels, no sharp, glamorous makeup. The shareholders exchanged confused glances. Adeyes placed a folder on the table, then slowly said, "Starting today, Okoye Global will establish a scholarship program called the Cinieri Foundation." The room fell silent. An elderly shareholder frowned. "You plan to use company funds to support poor children in Makoko?" Adeyes looked directly into his eyes. Her expression no longer carried arrogance, but it was steadier than ever before. "Not company money. I'm using my own." Another executive asked, "Why are you doing this?" Adeyes remained silent for several seconds, as though trying to swallow something painful lodged in her throat. Then she answered quietly, "Because I was once a poor child in Makoko. And if it weren't for a mother who sold akara in the market, I would not be sitting here today." No one said another word. No one objected. Because for the first time, the people in that room were not looking at a CEO trying to repair her image. They were looking at a daughter, trying to recover the piece of her soul she had once lost. But redemption is never easy. There were still nights when Adeyes could not sleep. She sat alone inside a house far smaller than before. No luxurious penthouse. No glass walls overlooking the city. Only a quiet home with warm yellow lights. Whenever heavy rain fell, memories of that terrible night returned. The locked door, her own cold voice, her mother's tear-filled eyes, and the question that still stabbed her heart every time she remembered it. "Are you truly that ashamed of your mother?" Adeyes understood that even though Mama Cinieri had forgiven her, some wounds take a very long time to stop bleeding. So she never forced her mother to forget. She simply stayed beside her. Every morning, they went to the market together. Every afternoon, Adeze drove her mother to the small church where they had embraced beneath the rain that night. Every evening, Adeze sat beside Mama Chinière listening to stories she once considered boring. Stories about her father. Stories about their tiny wooden house in Makoko. Stories about the days floodwater reached knee level, while Mama Chinière still walked miles just to pay tuition on time. One evening, Adeze quietly asked, "Did you ever hate me?" Mama Chinière was folding an old cloth at that moment. She paused for several seconds, then gently shook her head. "I was hurt, very deeply hurt, but I never hated you." Adeze's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" Mama Chinière placed the cloth down, then looked at her daughter for a long time. "Because from the day you were born, I made a promise to God that no matter how far life carried you away, I would always pray for you to find your way back home." Those words made Adeze cry again. Not loudly, not violently, just the quiet tears of someone finally understanding that a mother's love is not something meant to impress the world. It is the thing that silently keeps a person from falling into the darkness of their own soul. One Saturday morning, Adeze and Mama Chinière returned to Makoko together. Their car stopped beside the old wooden roads covered in rainwater. Barefoot children ran through puddles. Women balanced bowls of goods on their heads. The smells of dried fish, frying oil, and cooking smoke drifted through the wind. Adeze stepped out of the car. Her chest tightened painfully. Once upon a time, this place had been the part of her life she most wanted to erase. But now, it had become the only place reminding her who she truly was. Nearby, a little girl stared at Adeze curiously. Her school uniform was worn thin at the shoulders. An old book rested against her chest. Adeze saw herself in that little girl. She walked over slowly, then knelt down to meet the child's eyes. "Do you want to go to school?" The little girl nodded immediately. Her eyes sparkled with hope. Adeze smiled softly. "Then you will go to school." Behind them, Mama Chinière quietly wiped away tears. That same day, Adeze announced the first project of the Chinière Foundation. A small school for poor children in Makoko. Not a skyscraper, not a glamorous shopping center, just a simple school with a new metal roof, clean desks, and chairs. A tiny library filled with English books. But to Adeze, it became the greatest achievement of her life. Greater than every tower she had ever built. Greater than every multi-million-dollar contract, because for the first time, she had created something, not to prove how wealthy she was, but to give love back to the place that had raised her. On the opening day, dozens of reporters arrived. They waited for Adeze to speak. She stepped up to the microphone. Behind her stood Mama Chinière in a simple traditional dress. This time, Adeze did not hide her mother. She held her mother's hand tightly before hundreds of cameras, before the eyes of Lagos, before the same people who had once witnessed her cruelty. Adeze spoke slowly. "The woman standing beside me is not a past I need to hide. She is the reason I exist. She is the reason I understand sacrifice. And if I still have a chance to begin again today, it is because my mother chose to forgive me." The crowd remained silent for several seconds. Then applause slowly rose. Not loud like the applause at luxurious parties years before, but more sincere, warmer, and far deeper. Adeze turned toward her mother. Mama Chinière smiled gently, and in that smile, Adeze understood something important. Perhaps she would never completely erase her old mistakes, but she could still choose how to live the rest of her life. Many years later, people still spoke about Adeze Okoye, not only as the richest businesswoman in Lagos, not only as the daughter who once hurt her mother, but as someone who fell because of pride and rose again through gratitude and repentance. And whenever someone asked why she had changed, Adeze usually stayed silent for a long time. Then she would look toward Mama Chinière, sitting beneath an old umbrella, smiling inside the familiar poor market, and quietly say, "Some people spend their entire lives learning that having poor parents was never something to be ashamed of. The greatest shame is growing up through the sweat of their sacrifice, only to turn your back on them because you fear the world seeing where you came from." And from that day forward, every rainfall over Lagos no longer reminded Adeze only of the night she knelt before her mother asking forgiveness. It also reminded her that a person can build an empire with money, but only gratitude can keep their soul from collapsing.